Okay, so we've had some great content so far this morning. We thought next up, we've looked at being brave in terms of technology, in terms of looking at adversity and how we take that and make a success out of it. So we thought what better way to kind of take things forward than to look at how you rip up that marketing rulebook. And to help us do that, we have got, well, someone from the world's leading car brand. So without further ado, let's invite Oliver Maletz, who is the International Communications and Media Planning Chief, onto the stage from VW. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Okay. Thought we'd mix things up a bit. We've had a few keynotes, only one panel, so we thought we'd open up with a fireside chat. So it's been an exciting start to the year for you guys, named as the #1 automotive making brand in the world, which is very exciting.
It has been. Tesla aside, it has been.
Yeah, absolutely. And some real good things have happened. So I suppose where we should probably start is kind of what have been the biggest challenges from a marketing perspective in the automotive industry over the last few years?
I think the last few years, I'm not one to like to look back. I prefer to look forward. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have always had and will continue to have is really understanding consumers. I think the industry as a whole has spent a lot of time being able to talk about itself. You know, we're an engineering company, we're a manufacturing company, we're a sales company, not necessarily a marketing company. So if we say in January we have a new product, we hope you remember it in October because we told you so. We haven't really spent enough time as an industry at really trying to understand what is the consumer's path to purchase. How does somebody actually buy a car? And that has fundamentally changed, and it's changed faster than the industry has been able to keep up with that. The sale today is essentially made online. When we research a car, we pretty much know when we walk into a dealership which car we want. And we've seen dealership visits going down from 7 or 9 as late as 10 years ago or less than 10 years ago to 1 or 2 now. People know what they want. And we just haven't, from a communications standpoint, understood that path or those paths and which communications we need to give to help a consumer along a path. We've been focused on ourselves. So that's been a fundamental shift. And AI speaks a lot to that. I just hope when we get to that at AI stage that we really ask ourselves, not just because we can do something, should we? And I think that's going to be the big challenge with AI moving forward. We can do a lot, but should we?
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to get off on a tangent.
No, it's good. I mean, it's a big challenge. My next question was to you, what are the biggest challenges? You talked about kind of keeping a pace with what's happening in the industry, keeping a pace with the consumers. How do you guys go about doing that? And what else are you finding is the hardest thing?
The hardest thing actually is internal change. It's a big company, 600,000 odd people, focused on doing things a certain way. And our industry is changing, and we're used to having one transaction every 3 to 8 years with our customers, depending on how they purchase a vehicle. And now we're looking at transactions that could be monthly. Do I buy heated seats, or do I just buy them in the winter when I need them? Do I buy a navigation system or just rent it or borrow it or open it up for use when I need to take a long distance trip? So those kinds of things are much fewer transactions, and the industry is rapidly going in that direction. So we need to have our whole infrastructure rebuilt to managing and talking to consumers on a regular basis versus once every few years, and then let's focus on the next product, and let's focus on the next product. And one of the things that we've done is we've actually completely relooked at our consumer path to purchase and how we go to market and how we look at consumers. And we've actually turned the tables a little bit. In the past, we used to first brief our creative agency, and the creative agency would go off and come up with a terrific creative idea and show how that works in television, not even video, but television, and then show how that works in print. In the automotive industry, print is not exactly the first channel you'd look at in most markets, and some video, some online stuff. And it's been very hard to get them to think differently, so by the time we got to communications planning, we got a print plan, a TV plan, and some online stuff. So we've sort of turned that over, and we've now developing a core communications plan, and that is a fundamental part of the creative briefing. And in some cases, it may even decide which creative agency we use depending on the strengths of that particular agency. So we've shifted that a bit. It's not that we do all the communications planning up front, but we do that core bit, understanding the path to purchase and which consumers, what do we want them to do, say, or think, and what KPIs are we going to measure, all of that. What messages do we need to deliver? And then the creative idea is developed, and then we look at that creative idea and we look at how do we amplify that idea through the communication channels when we actually go to implement. It's a fundamental shift for us, yes. And it's proving challenging to implement.
Yeah, I was going to say, how long is there a kind of time span around how you do that? Because it's not the quickest thing. When you're in a big organisation, it's very hard to.
No, it's not the quickest thing. But I think the first thing is having a set process, getting everybody on board to that process, and then for the things that have already started, getting that through quickly and getting that in a transition period, if you will, getting that going. And then implementing that process. And that tends to be the hardest bit because the creative agency will come up with an idea and then, this is the idea. Yes. And then all of a sudden it's through. So being strict on ourselves and focusing ourselves and discipline to actually follow the process will be a challenge.
Yeah. And you mentioned the agencies there a few times in terms of, do you think over the last few years we've seen a real change of clients changing their agencies, changing who they work with? Do you think that's one of the big drivers for you in terms of actually we need to change because we need to change the processes, how we work, how we're communicating, where the ideas are coming from, how we're being informed? What's the kind of key drivers, do you think, to people looking at the moment more regularly than they were previously to change agencies?
To look at it, okay. Yeah. Well, for us, I can't speak for others, but I know for us, we because we looked at the process and we needed to change. We needed to look differently at what we were getting from our agencies. And I'm a big fan, I was on the agency side for a long time, but I'm a big fan of you get what you ask for. We, for many years, asked from our media agency, save money, save money, save money, save money. And by the way, save some money. And we've now fundamentally asked them to be more strategic and to think a little bit differently. And after, I think it was in some markets up to 15 years with the previous agency, that's difficult to do for an entire system to do. And it's also difficult for us, an entire system to do. So we shifted because we needed to relook. And we look every 3 years, but we don't always pitch every 3 years.
Yes.
We look at contracts every 3 years, but this time we actually pitched.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say you look every 3 years, and I was going to say that the last pitch was a long 18-month pitch.
Don't go there. We're starting now. No,
so,
Mike, we're not. Wherever you are.
That wasn't a surprise there for you. So, I mean, how do you manage such a long pitch? I mean, that is a long time. You know, you're trying to set up new process, look at new ways to communicate with your consumers, create that consumer journey, and yet you're trying to pitch at the same time. You know, how do you kind of cope with that, and what do you kind of put in place?
It was a challenging pitch. We couldn't have done it without the help of Ubiquity, so I know there's somebody from Ubiquity here somewhere. But we needed a third party to help us along the way. But it was a complicated pitch because I think we wanted to do it right. If we're going to make such a major shift across, it ended up being 40 markets that actually have made the switch. And we wanted to do it properly. So we went through an extremely vetted process. We had regional meetings, we had local meetings, we had headquarter meetings. I think from a planning capabilities perspective, looking at 7 holding companies in the beginning, because we did this at the holding company level. We ended up with over 22 meetings just for capabilities.
Wow.
And I felt bad for the agencies because the agencies, you know, for each region, we had one core meeting, and then that broke up into 7 individual brand meetings. And that times 7 holding companies is a lot of meetings. But I would say that this time last year, the people in Volkswagen who were involved in that were probably the best educated people in the industry on what the capabilities of the holding companies were. So it was good to do, but it was a challenging process.
Yeah, I mean, from your point of view, you mentioned earlier you've been agency side before. It must have been fairly interesting for you to see how that worked from the other side.
Yeah.
And what were the kind of learnings you took from that?
Well, I think, you know, if you're on the agency and new business side, you're always have a mantra of solve the client's problem, or you should have this mantra. And it's amazing how many agencies didn't do that. That, you know, the old adage of solve their problem first. Don't talk about yourself. You're there already. Talk about what the problem is, help us solve the problem. It's amazing how many haven't done that, and how many are still, you feel like they've met themselves for the first time in the lobby before they walk in. So it's amazing to see how much of that actually comes true on the other side of the table when you're actually looking at it. Everybody says they're the best at something. Everybody says they're number one. Everybody says their tool is bigger, better, faster, stronger, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. I think I just dated myself on that one.
I use Superman earlier. It's fine, don't worry.
But as much as they claim to be different, there are an awful lot of similarities. So a lot of it boils down to chemistry and who can you actually see yourself working with. So don't get me wrong, agencies, but when you're talking to us, sometimes we're just sitting there going, can I work with this person? I'm not hearing what you're saying. Yeah. Can I actually work with this person? Because quite frankly, we've heard it 4, 5, 6, 7 times before. So it gets boiled down to who thinks like we think, who can we actually see ourselves working with?
That's an interesting one, because I was going to ask you, what's the deciding factor? Obviously, you mentioned chemistry, you mentioned the previous agency you were telling them save money. What was the key decider in the end? Obviously, chemistry must have played a point, but how do you make that chemistry work straight away, I suppose, is one question, and what was that key decider in the agency you chose in the end?
I don't think you can make chemistry work. You can try to find the best fitting partner and do the best you can with that. But for us, we found an agency that really was surprisingly close to our own planning process, the way what we had already developed and we're trying to implement, and their systems, tools, approach, and thinking were remarkably similar to that it was a natural fit. It's not 100%. There's adjustment that need to be made, and Mark Holden at PhD once told me we broke their system because we're actually taking it to a different level, which is interesting. I hope we fix it. So that's interesting, but it's not, that's the part of it. You still have the whole procurement part to go through, and I've heard a lot of rumors that the decision was made based on procurement, which isn't really true. It's a bit like last click attribution. The last part of the process is procurement, and the decision is made afterwards. But it was a thoroughly vetted discussion, at least for Volkswagen brand.
Okay. And what's next for you guys now? Now that you've kind of talked about the process, restructuring internally, trying to understand that consumer journey, how do you go about doing that now? What's the key kind of agenda for you in terms of working out where we go next, how you make that consumer journey work?
Yeah, for us, it's a lot of getting the basics down right now. Because it's a new agency, we're still very much in the honeymoon phase. We have to relook at systems, approaches, processes, people. And we're talking a lot of markets that have to get implemented. We're good 5 months into it now, so we're moving actually quite well. So that what didn't impact the business as much as we thought it might, a major shift. But it's literally putting the meat, as I call it, around the bone of our process. So understanding the insights of the consumer, getting the right insights, understanding what channels they're using and why and how how we can provide them the right information. In getting all of those intricacies in place, while we're getting the base level, already looking ahead towards programmatic.
Right.
Because especially in our industry, where programmatic it's almost a natural fit. But it's a big challenge for us because we hadn't even thought about that before. Let alone centrally. In some markets we have, but centrally we certainly haven't had thought a global solution to how we look at our data, how we store our data, where we put our data. We saw the nice DMP map up here earlier. I've written more of those on my board in the last 6 months than I care to remember. But how do you pull that together, and how do you pull that technology stack together, and how much of that technology stack is really needed, and how much is duplicative? It's still very much the Wild West.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot of issues in trying to learn that. I mean, when we first met, you had a wall probably the length of this that had your programmatic mapping on it, which was
yeah, that was just draft
impressive.
one. Yeah, it's complex, and globally it's complex, and it is the Wild West. And you know, people keep asking me, how do we measure that effectiveness? At the end of the day, the measurement still for us as a company is selling cars, increasing our profit, increasing our sales, increasing our revenue. That's at the end of the day, and anything that we can do to do that, we will. And we firmly believe that programmatic is a tool that we can use to increase average transaction price. Just imagine we typically, and manufacturers typically, give a price and incentive offer. In mass media and television, everybody gets 3,000 euros off, or whatever the offer might be. Do we need to do that? Can we just give the 3,000 euros off to people that actually need or wouldn't buy without that, and for the other, upsell them to more profitable products or services, or even after sales? It's a completely different way of looking at it that we're not used to.
Absolutely, and I suppose that gives you that whole piece about how programmatic and how comms in general is driving your brand. How does that kind of fit into that, and how the whole comms machine is driving your brand? How are you kind of utilising that and taking advantage of it?
Yeah, that is the challenge, and it goes back to how we fundamentally shifted in putting comms planning at the head before even creative is briefed, understanding the path to purchase, and it's no longer just us talking about us and coming up with a nice twinkle in the eye story, which is wonderful, and I don't want to ever lose that. But that's not the end. We can't just launch a car and expect that to be it. So it's pulling that whole system together that we actually help a consumer along the journey and avoid a lot of the white noise that's going out there and really focus on them, the consumer, what they need, and then now micro-targeting and identifying literally hundreds of target groups for any individual model. And the amount of models we have, you can multiply that and get to thousands very, very quickly.
Okay. And I suppose one of the big things is it's such a competitive market, automotive. We've talked, obviously using programmatic, using new sources of technology, using new ideas. How do you cut through the noise? Whatever medium you're using, how do you cut through the noise as VW? It's such a competitive and noisy space.
Yeah, I think the whole cutting through the noise, I've always had an issue with that, because do we really cut through the noise? We're really shouting louder than somebody else. It's all these phrases that we've been using all our lives. They're not very consumer focused. Even the word disruption, consumers don't want to be disrupted, they want to be helped. And I think that's the challenge. And I keep repeating the same thing, but it's no longer about advertising and telling our story. It is about that, but then it's about helping someone make a decision and come to their own conclusion by giving them the right information at the right time, in the right way. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's you're kind of looking at it kind of as almost as a utility, advertising becomes a helping tool to prescribe what people are looking for. I suppose.
And again, we're looking at it to drive profitability now. I mean, being a leader, we're not. Incremental sales are costly, each incremental one. So it's not about incremental sales as much, it still is, but it's not as much as it is about driving the value of each customer, the value of each sale. That will be the challenge moving forward.
And what are I suppose, the next kind of year, 2 years, what are you most excited about in the role you're in now, and what are you most excited about from an industry perspective, and I suppose what are you most excited about learning from the industry and kind of bringing that into VW?
I think for me this is the most exciting time to be in this industry. Anything is possible. In days past we would think, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do that? Can we really do that? Today you don't have to ask can you anymore. You have to ask should you, and can I afford it? If we wanted to wrap the Eiffel Tower in a video wrap, we can do that. If I want to extremely micro-target you and give you an extremely personalized messages, we can do that. Is it a little creepy? But we can do that. So the question isn't can we, it's should we? And does it make sense? So I think that's definitely a big part of it. Going to places like this where we can see a lot of the startups and see what they're doing, and it's interesting. And again, we have to make sure that they're not the shiny penny and then they will go away. But we had an interesting conversation this morning about yet another data provider along a programmatic path that's adding yet another layer into it and another cost. At what point is too much cost too much? So these are the things that are keeping us busy and keeping us going every day now.
Yeah, and we've mentioned programmatic a few times, obviously, in this conversation. And
sorry, it's the main thing on my head.
Yeah,
right?
no, it's good because
and it's the session.
I think it brings us nicely onto something we haven't actually discussed across any of the sessions today, but there is lots of discussion this afternoon around it. But what are the biggest challenges in digital marketing at the present moment? Obviously, you talked about a wild west when it comes to measurement potentially. How do you kind of deal with that, and how are you going to ensure that you get the right measurement? How do you know that the dollar is being spent in the right place, that everything is clean and above board? How do you ensure that?
At the end of the day, we have our set of KPIs, whether they're profit or sales on the business side of it, or they're consumer KPIs. And if we're moving our KPIs in the right direction, it's working. The challenging bit now is it cost effective anymore? If we're looking at the amount of 100 euros that goes to a publisher after you go through all of your technology, you're at some cases below 50, less than half of it. So that means the effectiveness of the efficiency of that has to at least match what you're spending on technology to make it happen, to make it more effective. And if I spent 50 and I got 50, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Am I going through all of the process just to make work and to be smart, or am I actually making a positive effect? So I think those are some of the challenges that we have right now. Do we need all of this technology? We had a conversation this morning about brand safety and viewability and a lot of the Google issues that were coming up in the past. How are we actually going to address that? And talking to a technology company that essentially has something that you would think the ad server would have. I shouldn't have to think about serving an ad to someplace that's not viewable, that's not really a human, that's not in a brand safe environment. That technology should already be in my server. Do I need to pay again on top of that? So I think the industry is still merging. I think those things will all come together. I don't think we've seen by far the last of it, and I think the new technology is waiting to get in here at the next year's FOMs. It's an interesting space that keeps us all busy, it keeps us awake, keeps us thinking. And again, it's what should we be doing, not what can we be doing.
Yeah. And where do you see the biggest growth for you guys in terms of what's going to be the key element for you going forward now? What are the key things that you want to do as VW? What do you intend to do with your kind of mantra, your kind of plan for the next 12 months?
From a company standpoint, or from?
Yeah.
Well, I think overall, I think it's the industry is going in this direction. And I alluded to it earlier. It's going away from just selling cars to selling services. It's even whether it's a ride-sharing service or, we're talking about services that have package delivery in parked cars. I mean, there's a lot of things you can imagine and come up with, but it's fundamentally going to be going to a monthly or more frequent transaction basis, whether it's the navigation system or it's heated seats or it's park assist only if you really want it, then you can buy it. That's a fundamental shift that shouldn't be underestimated because we're not used to doing that. We're just not used to it.
And what do you find as the hardest thing as a marketer? What's the biggest challenge you personally face in the space you're in?
Internal change. I think agencies are much faster than we can ever possibly be, and getting our own internal systems to change and shift and evolve is a big challenge. So we find ourselves doing an awful lot of education, a lot of road shows, a lot of hands-on workshops. When we go to markets, we actually sit and do hands-on, and we work with the creative agency, work with the media agency, work with our local teams to actually get that shift, because it's no longer siloed thinking that's been mentioned here today a couple of times. It's really going back to some respects to the old model that I started in this business with, which is a full-service agency model, where media and creative were all bundled, except media is not at the back end of the line, it's at a bit more at the front end of the line, which you could argue it always should have been, but it hasn't been. So it's about getting that collaboration to work, and when it does work, it really is a really beautiful thing. You have a great creative idea, and you see it blown up through multiple channels. But to get the agencies to think that way is a challenge to get us internally to go, but we have to change the way we think. We have to change the way we're structured and not in individual silos, and really look at integrated communications, linking PR with events that are actually on the ground, with the motor shows that we're doing, with the advertising that we're doing. That's proving to be the difficulty. Change is a challenge for any of us, but when you're almost forced to, because the consumer is, it's even harder.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the things you need with that, if you're looking at new technologies, you're looking at new ways of working internally, you come with that, you've got to have the right talent. So obviously, when you're looking at a marketing team, you're looking at new CVs, different people who might not fit the kind of norm. Is that something that you guys are kind of looking at as well?
I have a stack full of CVs that are people I would love to bring in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we have so many people in our company, we can't bring additional ones in, so it's about training the people that we have, which is making the change a little bit more difficult. But we're an engineering, technology, and a production and a sales company. We're not known to be a marketing company. And that's something that we're actively working at changing. So it's a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to hog all the time. Does anyone have any questions for Oliver while we're there? Oh yes, we've got one in the front row here and one on the right. So where's our microphone people? There we go. They're coming to you. I won't forget you, sir. Don't worry. You will be next. I think the microphone is just there. I see a large hand.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Oh, look at that.
Simon Hudson from a company called Brandster, based out of Dubai. We actually built your chatbot for the Volkswagen Middle East. And the question I have to you is, technology and programmatic is obviously very exciting. However, the problem that we found is that you have a huge network of dealerships. So although the marketing is focused on new cars, the bot we built for you was to book a test drive. It had a huge success rate in the first couple of weeks, but then you have to communicate that with your dealerships. So with all this data, do you have any plans to actually have a centralized system for the dealerships? Because as a user, if I've bought a car or test drove a car, I have to go to a dealership to do that. So the question is, what plans have you got to centralize systems for the huge networks of dealerships that you have?
Yeah, that is a massive challenge because we don't have direct relationships with customers. We have to go through dealers, and we need to change contracts with a lot of that, and we're in the process of fundamentally going through all of our contracts to adjust for what's coming. But the dealer challenge and the dealer data challenge is a conversation that we'll have for a long time. The data, at the moment, the dealers own the customer. And we don't own the customer, we don't have that. We're working with dealers to build that up, but that's a market by market by market decision. It's relatively simple in a market like the Middle East where there are a few number of dealers, but if you look at Germany with 1,200 dealers or the US with 600 dealers, and they're all independent and have their own minds and way of doing things, it becomes a challenge. But yet, it is something that we're looking at. We're looking at revamping the entire way we work with them. And in this data-rich environment, especially CRM data, marrying that with all of the other second and third party and the other first party data that we have is a challenge, and it's an opportunity. And we look at it as the opportunity. That's where we're going through that. So that will come, but I think we have a first step to go before we get into the next step with the dealers.
Thank you. And if you need a bot for any of the other markets,
thought that's where that was going.
Very good. Okay, we had another question right in the front row here, please, if we've got a microphone. Okay, I'll jump down, don't worry. I'll try not to put my crutch in your ear.
Olivier from Video Intelligence. With the major shift to mobile, so what would be your major expectation when it comes to creativity? Because mobile is pushing agencies to create differently, and the digital audience has the versus traditional.
So question, how are we managing mobile and how are we thinking more mobile? And it's another challenge because we're not used to thinking in that way, and it goes back to the consumer path to purchase and what consumers actually do and what touch points they actually have. We're really looking, we won't look at any creative now unless we see it in a mobile environment first. I don't think we've gone so far as to say, show it to me first in mobile. I know there are some marketers that are out there, but we need to see how that will work in mobile. So it's not just the same 30-second ad that we're putting here and putting it on mobile. We're actually now finding ways to tell the same story, but tell it slightly different in a mobile environment than we would be telling it in a television environment. And we're actually going more lean forward than lean back, or sorry, the other way around, lean back than lean forward, fully understanding that how we engage people mobily is fundamentally different than how we engage them on a television screen. Did that answer your question?
Okay. Do you have any more questions out there, guys? Oh yes, right in the front row again here. Here we go.
How hard has it been to deal with the disruptive regulatory stuff that you guys have coped with, and how much of that has disrupted your agenda?
From a marketing perspective or from a company perspective? Both, of course. I should have only said it. From a company perspective, I think it's made us accelerate. I don't think there's anything that we weren't already in the process of doing, especially in the shift towards electric vehicles. We were already on that path, but I think it's forced us to be more serious about it and to go down that path. And what I mentioned earlier about the selling services on a regular basis, that's a part of that. But it's forced us to look at our marketing differently. When we had the affair hit at the end of 2015, everybody sprung into action, obviously. And you know, my personal mantra on that, and it's not always well accepted, but it's never waste a good crisis. So let's take this opportunity to do the things that we've been trying to do for the longest time, and now maybe the ears are on it. So I think and that's true from a communications or from a business perspective. It's accelerate the things we knew we should have been doing, we were already doing, but in pockets here and there, and consolidating and putting a full effort behind it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to
Thank
Oliver.
you.
Thank you.